Well, let's kick it off then, Jack. Hello and welcome everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on fictitious pickups, strategic theft, straight theft. We're going to talk about all kinds of cool stuff today. We've got a great panel of speakers for you lined up as well. My name is Kevin McMenamin. I am with Loss Prevention Magazine. I'll be your host today, along with my partner in organized retail crime, Jack Britton. Jack, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Hi, everyone.
We are excited about today's topic. Looks like we've got some great attendance today too. So we'll get started and get to it. So before we get into the actual content with the speakers, let me just run through a couple of thank yous, especially to our sponsors, Genetec and LVT. Remember, guys, without sponsors like this, we can't put on these great educational sessions. So please show them some love. Please check out and learn a little bit more about these particular vendors, about who they are, about what they do, and how they support our industry. They have some fantastic solutions, and they're great partners. Let's learn a little bit more about them. First, we'll start with LVT.
You know that tower with cameras and the flashing lights in the parking lot of your local store? Yeah, we make that, and the technology needed to reduce crime and increase safety in your community. In fact, it's made right here in America, in the great state of Utah. We're LVT. And the thousands of units we've deployed across the country are helping businesses increase life safety and security for their employees, customers, and communities. So when you see those flashing blue lights, just know we're working to keep you safe. See it in action at lvt.com.
All right. And our other sponsor today is Genetec. Genetec Inc. is a technology company with a portfolio that encompasses security, intelligence, and operations. The company's flagship product, the Genetec Security Center, is a physical security platform that unifies IP-based video surveillance, access control, automatic license plate recognition, or ALPR, communications, and analytics. For more information about Genetec, please visit www.genetec.com. I also want to thank our education partner, Loss Prevention Foundation. Thank you to LPF. LPF is also qualifying you for 3 CEU credits for today's session as well. So make sure that you keep track of that in your record. If you are LPQ or LPC certified, make sure you keep track of your CEU credits and get that in your profile. Next up is Loss Prevention Magazine. Shameless plug. If you are not already a subscriber, why the heck not? And it is free, FREE free. So please use that QR code. I'll bring it back before the end, I promise. But if not, and if it's not quick enough to get that phone out here, then go ahead and go to losspreventionmedia.com, click on the subscribe button there, and let's get you signed up, because this is a free publication. It is sent to your home or to your office. Costs you nothing. All right, Jack, our first speakers today. Let's get some introductions.
Right. Our first group of speakers today is Scott Cornel and Glenn Master. First, we have Scott Cornel. He is the National Practice Leader for Transportation and Crime and Theft. He's the Transportation and Crime and Theft Specialist for Travelers Inland Marine. Scott, welcome. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me today and including me in this. I'm looking forward to doing this. Happy to be here. Thanks for everybody who's joined us, giving us some time today. I've been with Travelers for about 24 years. I have a 29-year background in cargo theft investigations and supply chain security. And here at Travelers, I lead the transportation division for the Inland Marine Department and deal with the transportation and supply chain every day.
All right, next up we have Glenn Master. Glenn is currently Head of Asset Protection, Security, and Crisis Management for McLean, the largest privately held C-store and restaurant distributor in the U.S. Glenn.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Kevin. And obviously, thanks to Loss Prevention Magazine and hosting this really important topic. So I've been in the industry for 26 years. My entire career has been spent supply chain, logistics, transportation, started in the world of e-commerce. when e-commerce was B2C, and then as it obviously evolved to B2C, transitioned into distribution hybrid logistics, direct delivery returns, final mile 3PL carriers. And I've been very fortunate. I've built security and loss prevention programs now at 4 companies from the ground floor. So definitely have seen the industry change over the past 2.5 decades. And obviously today's topic is going to illustrate that.
One little concern today, I see both of your driver's licenses appear to have the same scribble underneath them. You guys work together on that, or what's the story?
Good verification. Good job verifying. Got to verify everybody that you're doing with.
They might be fictitious, Jack. They might be
You
fictitious.
think?
The sad part about that actually does look like my signature.
Yeah, I believe that. So, well, welcome, guys. We're really looking forward to today's presentations.
Yeah, Scott, I think I've got a couple of slides here to start us out with some information that you guys sent over from CargoNet. Maybe we set the stage here with just kind of that overview on the impact of supply chain theft that we're seeing in the big increases over the last several years.
Sure. I thought it would be a good place to start, just kind of set a foundation for today. So, sort of why are we here? Why are we having this meeting today? Well, because as you can see, cargo theft has had some massive increases over the last couple of years. One of the most asked questions I get is, the increases that we're seeing, are they temporary? How long are they going to last? When are they going to come back down? And Glenn, you and I have talked about this a lot lately. And, the answer to that, unfortunately, is this is not temporary. This is going to continue to go up. At some point, we will level out, and that will kind of be the new norm. But unless something drastically changes in supply chain security or in regulation or something like that, I don't foresee this coming back down. And why? Because about 2.5 years ago, cargo theft in the United States fundamentally changed forever. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happened and why that happened as we go through today. But you can see that the uptick started, we saw what's called the COVID bump in 2023, right? And then it came back down. But I think myself and all the other experts noticed, hey, it didn't come all the way back down. It just came down a little bit, right? And then it started to bump up again in 2022, and then you see the massive jump between 2022 and 2023. Now, keep in mind, I use CargoNet numbers for most of my instruction when I'm teaching classes on this or talking about it. And understand that these numbers are a sample size. These are not all the cargo thefts that take place in the United States, right? In the United States, there is no mandatory reporting of cargo theft. So we don't get those numbers through the federal government like we do for other things like auto theft, burglary, you name it. So companies like CargoNet, and I think CargoNet does a fantastic job of it, they gather what they can get voluntarily reported to them and what they can get through open source data, and they put together a report. So what I always say when I'm teaching a class is pay more attention to the trends. The trends are extremely accurate. If you're looking at that total number, my professional opinion is that they get somewhere between 1/10 and 1/20 of what's actually happening out there. So if you're looking at 2023 closing out with just under 3,000 reported, at least multiply that by 10, and then you're somewhere in the ballpark. If you're including pilferage in there, I think you're closer to 1/20 of what's actually going on out there. So we can see that major jump really took place between 2022 and 2023, and that's when that foundational change happened. And if you go to the other slide, we can see where most of that impact took place. And most of that impact took place in the strategic theft category, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So traditionally, there are 2 categories for cargo theft. There's what we call straight theft, which the simplest way to describe it is they go straight out to the freight where it sits. They're physically on site. They're stealing it at the location. Strategic theft, the simplest way to explain that is when they basically trick you into giving them the freight, whether that's identity theft, fictitious pickups, double brokering scams, and a number of other methods. Traditionally, strategic theft was a very small overall percentage of total cargo theft numbers in the United States. Over the last couple of years, strategic theft has exploded. And we think a lot of that is due to what we saw during COVID, the ability for people to do more remotely, work more remotely, and figure out how they can actually use the tools and the systems that the supply chain has put in place against it to actually commit the thefts. And once they realized that, once they found that gap, they really exploited it, and we saw that explosion. That fundamental change that I talk about is we've gone from traditionally cargo theft was conducted by small regional organized, but regional and rather unsophisticated cargo theft rings. And they were usually 8 to 12 people. Most often they were related. They were fathers, cousins, brothers, uncles, sons, you name it. And they would work within a region, and they would commit mostly straight theft, some strategic theft. They were relatively unsophisticated. We knew them. Glenn knows. We'd go out, we'd conduct investigations, you'd pull video, and you'd recognize the person on the video. And then from there, you knew the methods, where they were going to try and move the stolen freight, you know, what they were going to target, things like that. And that was what we saw in the US traditionally for the longest time. Between 2021 and 2022, cargo theft in the United States became an internationally based crime. And that's when we saw the explosion in strategic theft. So now we're seeing strategic theft attempts in the United States from more than 22 different countries. These rings are much more organized. They're larger in scope. They're soup to nuts organizations, meaning they have call centers, boots on the ground. They have their own supply chain set up. They have sophisticated methods for selling the freight, whether it's online or through channels that they've established to move the freight. And what they've established at this point is a global demand, a global supply chain demand, right? And so that is what's driving the massive increases in numbers, because we went from these small crews that were selling things at flea markets or online or had a fence that would buy a load or two, to this global supply chain where they launder the freight and they can then move the freight internationally to their customer base, which has a much larger demand and is driving this massive increase. So I don't see any indication that this is going to slow down. I thought this would be a good way to start the conversation and get us headed in the right direction.
There we go. Let me stop sharing screen here. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for kind of laying those out for us and helping us kind of understand the, you know, the growth and where this is headed. And you know, like you said, this is like tip of the iceberg. You know, it's kind of like when they do polling, right? You know, you pick 500 people and you get a kind of a sense of what's going on. You know, in this case, you're getting a sense based on what's being reported, but you're really not, we're not getting true numbers, because until there comes a time where these are required to be reported, we're not going to see the real impact. But we know this is happening, and you guys are living this stuff every day. Glenn, you're in a position where, you know, you're seeing these thefts firsthand. You know, maybe give us a little kind of an overview and a fictitious theft 101. You know, what is this? What is this that we're talking about, you know, today? You know, what is it that they're doing that's taking these trailer loads of merchandise, and how are they getting away with it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, Scott and I go way back, and you know, as I mentioned, in building programs for multiple companies, from a specific retailer to hybrid logistics, the whole key e-commerce piece. The evolution of this crime is nothing short of miraculous, how the criminals have been adapting. So if I were to take us back 7-10 years ago, working for a retailer in an e-commerce type of environment from a loss prevention standpoint, the type of crimes we saw, and at that time, obviously, it was not strategic theft. It was all annotated as either straight theft or fictitious pickups. Essentially, you would just see a crew, as Scott had just explained, who would show up. They would get on a brokerage board. They would see a particular load to come pick up. They would create a fake BOL that would look very legitimate. They would show up at your distribution center in a 3 to 6 hour time slot. They would show the paperwork to the security officer. Security officer would normally contact receiving, get an overhead door, and direct that independent owner operator to the door, in which they would hand over the bill of lading, hook up to the load, and then it would disappear. So essentially driving right off the lot with $250,000 of your product. And, within 24 to 48 hours, normally the retailer would have an understanding of what took place, obviously, because the product did not get to its intended location. And at that time, as a loss prevention practitioner, it was very reactive in how do you mitigate this? How do you reduce the exposure? And really, it was at the point of the distribution center. There was a lot of focus at the security level, training of security officers in conjunction with training the receiving personnel. And then as this evolved, the supply chain is very slow to evolve even in 2024. So a lot of distribution centers use pen and paper. At that time, we actually worked with our IT department and an outside software developer and created a check-in, check-out process with a web-based application on an iPad. So essentially, as trucks are coming in, trucks are departing, now instead of the security officer just looking at an ID, they may be recording the information on the security log. They may not. It may be illegible if you go back to try to investigate or research it. Now you actually are leveraging a technology application. It had the ability to actually take pictures of the drivers. It had the ability to scan the barcodes of a driver's license or take a picture of the driver's license. So now we were trying from a prevention standpoint by actually getting in the face of the driver, knowing that if you are here to steal the load, we're going to know a lot more about you than what we previously, but how we were previously trying to obtain information at the point of pickup. And that seemed to have worked, right? But again, a lot of it had to do with the training of the security officer in conjunction with receiving. So we're just not handing off the load in hundreds of loads. Now, as this has evolved, and fast forward 5 to 7 years, a recent case that I consulted on had to do with a load of alcohol. And how this ultimately ended up playing out is the criminals were based in a West African country. They actually had a call center. They got on our U.S. brokerage boards, essentially taking advantage of the holes in the system in our trucking brokerage boards. They got a load. They did that fictitiously by posing as a legitimate trucking company. They ended up securing the job. They then ended up posing as another company and sub-brokered it a second time. They sub-brokered it a third time to a mom and pop independent owner operator. Again, all legitimate companies. That individual then ended up going down to the border where this load of alcohol came over from a cross-border situation, cleared customs, was essentially awaiting a pickup in the warehouse. The individual showed up, picked up the load, and at that time, the fraudsters called the driver as he had left the location in South Texas and was basically going to the East Coast, and informed the driver that the distribution center had a fire. And we needed to redirect the load to Los Angeles to a distribution center that was up and operational. So this was literally happening in real time as they left South Texas. So by the time they got to Houston, instead of going east, they ended up going west. They got about an hour outside of Los Angeles. The call center ended up calling the driver again, stating that the distribution center that we had directed the load to, it won't be open until 9 a.m., but we want to get you offloaded quick. So here's a new address in a distribution park, and we're going to send over a 38-foot box truck to meet you with our receiving staff, and they're going to do an unload. And in the parking lot at 5 o'clock in the morning, this unload of a large amount of liquor ended up taking place, which ultimately, through the investigation, we discovered had a potential buyer in Southeast Asia and was in the port within 48 hours and on a boat. So if you were to contrast those two types of crimes from 7 years ago to now, that's really how this crime has evolved. And to Scott's point, it is now very, very internationally based. And from an education standpoint and from an investigation standpoint, educating at the distribution center level now is not going to work anymore. Training security guards, training receiving staff is not going to work because everything basically is legitimate to the point that it's not. And by the time the company realizes the load's been stolen, sometimes that does not happen until a week to almost 10 days later, once it ends up getting into the cargo claims arena within the company.
Well, we have a lot of folks on the call that aren't as familiar with the supply chain loss prevention aspects here. The part that really stands out to me, obviously it takes a lot of, we'll call it gumption, to be able to pull something like this off. Okay. But how do they get that information to start with? How do they know, what the load's going to be and where and when to pick it up and so forth? How do they get that type of information to even get the whole process rolling?
Yeah, so a couple of things I would point out that Glenn's example highlights, right, is when you come to the changes, you mentioned that it takes a lot of gumption to do this, right? But it actually takes less gumption to do this newer method than the method that Glenn spoke about that happened 5 or 7 years ago, right? What the thieves have been able to do at this point is they're putting themselves arm's length away from the theft. The old school fictitious pickup that Glenn mentioned, it was usually the bad guy at the dock picking up the stuff, right? And if somebody sniffed them out at the dock, we'd hear stories of, the police being called and the driver taken off in the truck, or, as soon as he figured out that he was being sniffed out, he would take off and leave and things like that. So what they've done now is, the method that Glenn highlighted is the most common method that we're seeing in the industry. I pretend to be a trucking company on a load board. That's how I get the information. The load's assigned to me, right? I bid on the load on a load board. The load is assigned to me. I now have the information. Then I turn around and pretend to be that freight broker, and I go and I hire a legitimate trucking company to go pick that freight up for me. Now that legitimate trucking company has nothing to do with the theft. They don't have any idea that they're being involved in this. They just think they're being booked to go pick up freight. So when they go to pick up that freight and somebody says, hey, can we take a picture of your driver's license? Yeah, answer some questions. Can we take pictures of your tractor and trailer? Yeah, no problem. Because they don't know they're doing anything wrong. So what do they have to hide? Why, and they're not nervous, they're relaxed, because again, they just think they're doing what they do every day, which is to go pick up a load. And then they get these rerouting instructions afterwards. Now, some of the biggest cracks or some of the biggest cases that have been cracked come from one of those drivers who at some point during the redirect or something like that says, something's not right here, right? And they either start calling somebody, like they call the customer, they call the shipper, they call the place where they just picked up the freight, or they start taking pictures. We've had that where, we do a follow-up investigation. Our team is investigating one of those losses, and the driver goes, yeah, you know what, something wasn't right. So just in case, I took some pictures, and they had license plates in the pictures or things like that. And it ends up leading to a big bust. I think the other thing that Glenn's example highlights is that freight was almost immediately getting ready to be moved out of the country. This is another big part of the change that we've seen. 5, 7, 8 years ago, 7 out of 10 loads stolen in the US stayed in the US. Depending on the commodity, some stuff would get moved out, but the majority of it we would find or recover or find being sold somewhere here in the US. As we sit here today, 6, 7 out of 10 loads stolen in the US are being moved overseas, because that's where that new marketplace is. That's where they can launder the freight, clean it up, make it look legit, and in some countries they can go sell it as legit with the buyer never knowing, or in some countries they're going to have chains that don't care if it's legit, and they're going to be able to open that up. So I think that's a great example that Glenn gave. And to answer your first question, it's easy for them to get that information. It's easy for them because they just pose as the original trucking company that's getting booked on the load.
Scott, are there particular regions or routes that are like more popular, more vulnerable? Maybe to even, and is that changed at all too?
The key places haven't changed. So this is a great question that the answer is much different than it was 4 years ago. So the key places are the same, right? Southern California is number one, and is number one by almost twice its nearest competitor, right? And then you're looking at Texas, that Dallas, Houston area, Florida, Southern Florida, Atlanta, Savannah in Georgia, Memphis in Tennessee, the Chicago area in Illinois, the New Jersey area. What do those areas all have in common? They're all near major ports, or they have inland ports because of massive rail yards like Memphis and Chicago, right? They have huge population densities, they have big economies, and that's where the freight is. But what we have seen with this massive increase in strategic theft over the last couple of years, if you look at the heat map that CargoNet puts out, the spread of the cargo theft to the interior of the country to what we would consider non-traditional cargo theft areas is incredible to see. And why is this? Well, several reasons. One, cargo theft has essentially become a work from home career choice for the bad guys. So they can be anywhere and they can steal freight anywhere. They don't have to be on site near the port of LA or near the port of Miami. Those crews that we talked about that were regional, they're still here. They're still doing that stuff. We still see that. We still see the follow crews and everything like that. But these internationally based, they're going to target the freight they want and they care less about the location. And in fact, if they find a commodity that's getting booked out of Omaha, Nebraska, they like that better because people in Omaha, Nebraska haven't seen much cargo theft. So they're not going to be on guard for it. They're not going to be as leery of it as somebody who's been working in South LA for a long time, or Southern California, LA area for a long time, because they see cargo theft every day. If I'm somewhere in Wyoming, I probably haven't seen a cargo theft before. I'm not going to be as on guard. So we're seeing them target freight all over the country now, and that spread has been very notable for the last couple of years.
You would think that they want to be close to some place that they could, move it offshore, right?
Well, they don't care because they're going to have that legitimate trucking company bring it to where they want to have it shipped. If you think about Glenn's example, right, they were directing him over to the LA area, right? So that's what they were getting ready to do, exactly what you're saying. But they don't care how far they have to go with it because they're having somebody else do it for them. And listen, I always say cargo thieves are great at two things specifically. One, they know what to steal and when to steal it. So when we see target, commodities, that'll change depending on certain ingredients and elements. But number two, they're great at return on investment. They're better at return on investment than, the majority of businesses because they don't have much overhead and they're going to hire somebody, $4,000 to take that load, $3,000 to take that load to LA, but the load is worth $180,000, $200,000, $250,000. And that's a great return on investment.
Yeah, you look at that in comparison to like your ORC network. But those actors are part of the network. Those ones, the guys that you're getting in the stores, the cleaners, the fencers, all those groups, you're following up that chain. But in this case, far more sophisticated, it's far more strategic, right? Because those actors at that first level, first and even probably second levels in a lot of cases, are legitimate businesses. They don't necessarily know that what they're doing is part of this, complicated ring. Would that be fair to say, Glenn?
Yeah, and they're taking, like I mentioned earlier, they're taking advantage of our brokerage system, right? I mean, the transportation system in the U.S. and like in most countries, it has developed over time for a reason. If you look at any sort of company, regardless of what vertical, retail, manufacturing, technology, the most expensive part of your operation is moving freight from point A to point B, right? Even in the days of e-commerce, when you think how e-commerce first started out in retail, the predominant players that retailers were using to get the product picked, packed, and shipped, and then final mile to their customers ordering online was proprietary networks. It was FedEx and UPS. As that evolved, as e-commerce evolved, the proprietary networks are still there, but very, very limited. So now companies are looking for alternative methods to reduce their overhead costs from a transportation. And the way to do that is brokerage companies, contractors, subcontractors. And it's funny because from what I learned through the years, especially with loss prevention, as I would try to learn more about how losses were happening, regardless of whatever avenue the criminal networks were taking, and I would speak to other loss prevention peers, a lot of the feedback I got was, well, that's not my problem. That's transportation's problem. They're working with that. And when I was working in a hybrid network, I had two roles. Up front was loss prevention, the traditional security investigation prevention measures. But on the back end, I was also working cargo claims and opening up my eyes to, all right, now it's just kicking the can down the road and having somebody tell you that, well, go to the transportation team. They'll figure it out. And then a lot of times nobody really wants to take ownership. Well, we've got insurance for that, or we'll hit the brokerage up for that. But the end user, the customer, who does not receive the freight, the end user, obviously within the four walls of your operation, what's the cost of this? It's just not lost product. If you have to expend the energy, the labor to pick, pack, and ship, and put packages on a trailer again to ship to either a store, to a 3PL carrier, or to your customer, there's a labor cost to that. And it is in the millions of dollars. So a lot of people, when it comes to this type of cargo theft, it's always been a kick the can mentality. We'll get our money back eventually. We've got MSAs with the brokerage firm. They're responsible for it. But the reality of it is we really should be doing a better job of doing more root cause analysis other than just reacting to a problem or just kicking the can down the road.
So obviously we've come a long way from product falling off the back of the truck. Okay, everything's gotten a lot more sophisticated. We're doing a lot of different methods to accomplish the goal of getting a hold of our cargo. So what are some of the more effective strategies for preventing this type of problem at whatever stage along the supply chain?
Yeah, we work closely with our clients on prevention. My grandmother used to say, let's keep the horse in the barn rather than chase it once it's in the field, right? So obviously, if you have to respond to a theft, you want to be able to, and you want to have an effective way to do that. But prevention is key. And I'm sure Glenn will have a lot to add to this, but when we work with our clients, we do it on a 3-layered approach, right? And that first layer is good process and procedures. If you don't have, and that's free, right? Good process and procedures are largely free. I mean, you may have some internal costs, whether it's manpower or time spent or something like that, but you're not going out purchasing things or paying for a subscription or whatever. It's good process and procedures. And then that second layer, if you're talking about straight theft, that would be where you'd add hard locking devices, security devices like high security rear door locks, kingpin locks, landing gear locks, things like that. If you're in the freight broker world, that's going to be your vetting process. That second layer is going to be your vetting system that you're going to have in place. And then the third layer for both straight theft or strategic theft is going to be the introduction of technology. If you make the mistake that a lot of people make, whereas you jump right to the third layer because you think that technology is going to solve all your problems, you will see regular failures in the use of the technology because your team doesn't have good process and procedures in place on how to utilize that technology. And if you skip to the second layer and ignore the first layer, that will crumble for the same reasons, right? So when you're talking about strategic theft in particular, it has to be a very good soup to nuts process on how you vet who you're doing business with. How do you vet carriers? And that starts with good process and procedures. What are you going to ask for information? How are you going to verify some of that information? What's it going to look like? Who are you going to talk to? What questions are you going to ask? Then you go into that second layer of, now we're going to take all that information, we're going to put it through a vetting process, right? And part of that vetting process will be the addition of the third layer, which there are several companies that have come into the industry as of late that will help you vet the carriers, whether it's the phone numbers or verify the ELD and location, whether it's the banking information, the owner information, all those things. So you add those 3 layers together and it becomes a soup to nuts process. I think the biggest thing that I'll say here is when you look at the numbers, you look at the increases, you look at the techniques, you look at the fact that this has gone global, and most importantly, you look at the fact that this is not temporary and it is not going away. Theft prevention in the supply chain has to become part of the culture of the way you do business from start to finish, just like safety became that 20, 25 years ago, right? Whenever you deal with anybody in transportation now, we always discuss safety, driver safety, equipment safety, maintenance safety, you name it, all of it. If we don't get to that point with supply chain security, it's always going to be spotty, and we're always going to have holes and gaps, and it's always going to be a problem. Glenn, I know you can add a lot to that.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously we want to bucket this into two things, right? So straight theft is basic prevention. I often use the analogy, you're not going to leave for work and leave your garage door open, and then be surprised if you come home and your chainsaw has been stolen out of your garage, right? So same thing from a logistics environment. Basic security industry standards of not backing a full load up to a fence on a very large lot where somebody could easily access the lot, not be found, cut through the fence, access the trailer. Most transportation networks are hub and spoke, very similar to the airline. So you have a main hub, and a lot of times you'll have either a satellite or a domicile location where a trailer may be dropped for an additional pickup and then delivery, because that's how our global system works, as a hub and spoke. A lot of times we fail to secure those spoke locations. So you may have a full trailer load with no locks on it, sitting in an unsecured lot, no security, no cameras, no security guards, no kingpin or glad hands on it, and somebody will just come up in a tractor, hook up, and leave. So it's for the loss prevention practitioner for straight theft, it's basically following industry standards, and especially knowing your network and knowing where those security exposures lie within the network. The strategic theft bucket, obviously, and as we've been discussing, it is gotten to a point of being so complex that the prevention piece is becoming a challenge for practitioners. So the approach that I've been taking is really getting engaged with our transportation teams in understanding how our network is operating, understand the brokerage companies, and then really putting the onus on the transportation providers and even the dispatchers within companies on continuous follow-up once loads are brokered and they're being delivered. You know, we have a history in the industry of book it and forget about it. And if it shows up, great. If it doesn't show up, then everybody goes into reactionary panic mode, right? So we have to be very strategic in our approach now going forward in partnering with our transportation providers, understanding the brokers they're using, understanding how those brokers are vetting. And as practitioners, which was unheard of 5-7 years ago, actually even engaging the brokerage companies to understand what is their mitigation practices, what is their research, what is their investigation practice. Because the reality of it is, and this is why we're having this, you've got to have a strong network. Okay. I'm president of ISCPO, International Supply Chain Protection Organization. Scott and I are going to be in Toronto in November speaking about this particular type of strategic theft, because now it is going north of the border. I'm hearing from some colleagues that this is now occurring in European countries. So as Scott mentioned, it's very internationally based, and the way to mitigate this is through education versus just putting our heads in the sand and hoping that it's going to go away.
And I think the one thing too that neither of us mentioned this time, Glenn, is the shippers really need to partner better. The shippers have to be better partners when it comes to supply chain security, and that's not a criticism. It's the reality that, you know, the bad guys have found that that's an extra place of opportunity for them to commit this theft, right? And so the shippers in particular have to start to work closely with the freight brokers. And then, as you know, Glenn mentioned, the freight brokers have to work closely with their business partners. So again, it goes back to that. It has to become part of the culture of the way we do business, soup to nuts. The shippers now have to help the freight brokers carry out all the prevention that they need those freight brokers to do.
Yeah, you would think, you know, back in the day, it would be unheard of for a loss prevention practitioner, especially, let's say, in a retail environment, to go outside the four walls and actually be speaking with the brokerage company or be speaking with security practitioners, their peers, in the shipping industry. But the reality of this is the only way we are going to be able to educate ourselves and combat this new way of doing business for the criminals. And that is expanding the network, continuing to educate yourself, and getting a partner. I can tell you, at least from the straight theft standpoint, it is a rarity that we do not work an investigation where if a crew comes in and actually hits the distribution center, hits the yard, that crew has not hit 3 or 4 other companies within a 48-hour period in a particular geographic area, right? And for the police and to get their involvement in investigation, it's a lot more sexier if they're dealing with a lot larger cargo theft that's impacting 3, 4, 5 different companies, and there's now collaboration going on amongst the loss prevention practitioners and law enforcement versus just a one-off type theft with one particular company.
Well, with the international angle on this, especially, but even in in local and regional response from the shipper, the retailer, law enforcement, that whole collaboration angle, appears to be something that really needs to evolve as well. What's that like? Obviously in the organized retail crime arena, we have the orcas. We've got data sharing platforms that are being used. What about in the supply chain and the cargo theft area, and what's the impact? And Scott, that would tie in the insurers as well, obviously, right? So, how are we doing this with bringing together the shippers, the retailers, the insurers, law enforcement, and what's that collaboration effort? I mean, Glenn, obviously with a giant nod to ISCPO because you guys are leading that charge. We're going to speak to Jessica Lowrance, who has a whole sort of supply chain group as well. But curious as to what role you see that playing in sharing that information.
Yeah, and I'll speak from the networking standpoint, right? So I think, and I've often said this, hence the genesis behind the ISCPO organization or TAP or any other of the organizations that are out there. And it's really no different than how we collaborate amongst retail trade organizations, right? The larger your network, you're going to develop 2 things. One, a broader education on understanding what risks, exposures are that's impacting in the industry. And then 2, when you have to work on mitigating the exposure or doing an investigation, you're not doing it alone, right? And that's where it's critical, where you start talking to people and all of a sudden you realize, and you don't feel isolated on your own island, all of a sudden you realize, wow, we are now part of a lot larger domestic and or international criminal network. And now we can put all of our heads together. So as I mentioned before, the organizations, no matter what they are, find an organization out there that specifically relates to the supply chain industry, to transportation, law enforcement. A lot, obviously there's been a lot of talk about reduction in funds for law enforcement, and that's especially in the arena of cargo theft. But a lot of departments still have individuals out there, and that is their bread and butter, is they work cargo theft, and they are always willing to want to network and connect with private sector practitioners because their resources have been cut. And on the private sector, we obviously have the resources to pull everything together and really spearhead the investigation, not only with law enforcement, but also with district attorneys through prosecution.
Yeah, I think, and the networking is critical, right? And Glenn mentions how big is your network. I mean, just last week, Glenn, we were on the phone about something, right? And sharing information, sharing points of contact and things like that to get a quick result, right? And I think when you talk about organizations, I was one of I think the first group of board members, was it the first group or the second?
ISCPO, yeah.
First group of board members for ISCPO. I'm currently serving as the vice chair for TAPA, which is the Transported Asset Protection Association. Both of those organizations are nonprofit, right? I think one of the things that's great about a lot of the organizations that drive this networking and supply chain prevention and information sharing are nonprofit. They don't have a commercial angle to them, right? They're not out there trying to make a bunch of money. They're just trying to bring everybody together. So I think both those organizations that's their main point, is how do we create a network? How do we develop resources for everybody? Big part of that is education. ISCPO holds a couple of different educational opportunities a year. TAPA holds the T1, the National Cargo Theft Summit every year, and then the T2, which is in December, which is a highly attended cargo theft education session. We host one of the largest attended cargo theft summits in the country with CargoNet, and that's coming up in Monrovia, California, October 2nd and 3rd. But that's been an annual thing for just over a decade now. JJ Coughlin, who runs the Southwest Transportation Security Council, that's one of the longest standing, if not the longest standing regional security council. Again, nonprofit, very, very small fee to join. JJ puts on one of the best education and networking sessions every year, right around March or April, depending on how things are falling. And then some of the bigger organizations like ATAM, TCA, TIA. I sit on a task force for the TIA, who's really been trying to outreach to their client base over the last year and a half or so. And they put together a recent fraud report they released. So there are a ton of resources, I guess is where I'm going with that you can become a part of, where you can get education, where you can get networking, where you can get all that information. And I think this industry in particular partners better. I've been in investigations, I've been doing cargo theft for almost 29 years, but investigations is a total longer than that. I think cargo theft and supply chain issues, I've never seen the ability for law enforcement and private sector to partner closer than what they do in this particular area. The partnership there is like nothing I've ever seen. Law enforcement attends the conferences, they speak at the conference. We have 2 law enforcement panels at our conference. TAPA has them, Glenn has them at his, where they come in, they help share information, they share intel, they gather intel, they want to meet people in the private sector so they know that they have people they can reach out to for information. So there's no shortage of information sharing or intel sharing or networking. You just have to make a point of going out and getting involved in it. Join one or all of those organizations. There's relatively low to no cost on a lot of those things.
Can we talk a little bit about the technology? I mean, obviously, technology works on both sides of this equation. We have the technology that's being used by the actors here, and we also have technology that's benefiting us as the practitioners in trying to stop these problems. How do you feel that technology has changed the landscape of cargo theft and the way we approach it?
Well, yeah, it's and I'll start with that, but Scott probably is going to dovetail, since we talked about this during our podcast last month. With cargo theft, and especially, everybody talks about GPS devices, and 10 years ago it was really the size of a brick. It wasn't a very viable option, and that's if it actually worked. Now, obviously, the technology has decreased in size, its capability, whether it's pinging off of a cell phone tower, satellite, a combination of both. I think the biggest change that I've seen with technology, really, as it works with the solution providers, is before the solution providers really would just have a one and done application. This is what we built. We think it's going to work for you. And if it was a good solution provider, they would ask you about what the results were. But most of the solution providers really, it was a one and done type of application. I have never seen more collaboration with solution providers than I have in really the most recent 2 to 3 years. And that's across multiple facets, whether it's e-commerce, moving small packages through 3PL final mile networks, GPSs on tractor trailers, or trains or cargo containers. I mean, the capability right now to leverage our technology worldwide, where you could actually track a cargo container on a train moving from China across Siberia into European countries on delivery. That's something obviously that was not present 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think just the collaboration in itself, working with the solution providers, they're very open to hearing case studies of our investigations, what's working, what's not working. And the reality as a practitioner, we should be doing a better job, if you're already not doing that, by challenging the solution provider to come up with a solution to your problem. If the technology semi-works and it really doesn't work 90% or greater to mitigate your particular problem, challenge your solution provider to come up with a new and innovative way of doing things. Right, Scott?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Glenn and I joked when we did his webinar that when we started, the tracking devices were the size of a brick. They were $3,000 a piece. The battery life was terrible and the coverage was terrible. And now they go anywhere from, single use can be anywhere from $50 to something with all the bells and whistles, $250. And they can track pretty much anything like Glenn talked about. I think technology's come a long way. When you talk about it on the straight theft side, that covert tracking, cameras, plate recognition, like one of the sponsors has, things like that, those are all critical, and those have come a long way on the straight theft side, as well as monitoring systems, algorithms within the cameras that can recognize whether it's a dog, a human, a car, so that people don't have to stare. The old days of security guards staring at a screen until they fell asleep at their desk and then missed what was going on should be gone, right? Theoretically, if you're keeping up with technology. On the strategic cargo theft side, you have companies. We have an innovation page that we talk about for our clients, where we go out and we kind of look at different vendors and, do they offer something good? And then we bring those to our clients through that. And companies like Verified Carrier, who will help you verify the company that you're doing business with, make sure that the trucking company is legitimate, that it's not one of these bad actors trying to steal freight. Companies like Transport Security, who have the hard locking devices and the tracking capabilities. CargoNet, who supplied us with those slides, that is there for reporting and gathering information and insisting you on trying to help you get your cargo back if you have a loss. But you're seeing companies like that evolve. To Glenn's point, like CargoNet is coming out with a route assessment tool and a route rating tool and several other things that they're getting ready to bring to market. I think that I think the industry is excited about. But I think the best point that Glenn makes is, right now there are so many new companies coming to the marketplace. Most of them are willing to listen to your feedback, especially if you have a high level of expertise. They want your feedback. They want to improve their device or their solution. So they will listen to you. They will listen to your case studies. They'll listen to somebody like Glenn, who lives it every day. They'll listen to somebody like me, who sees it every day, and they will make adjustments. And that, to me, is a big indicator of whether or not they're A, going to be good to work with, and B, going to be successful at what they're trying to do.
Well, it also sounds like they've gotten much more involved in some of your conferences, isn't that right, Glenn?
Yeah, so our organization, we took a little bit different avenue. Some of the organizations will bring as many practitioners in as possible, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You look at GSX, which obviously is the largest global security organization worldwide, and I'm next week down in Orlando, and I'm sending several of my folks down there because I have a particular challenge that I've yet to find a solution for in the industry. And there may be a solution provider, domestically or internationally, that might be coming down to the event, and they've got an application that's going to suit us for the particular risks and issues that we are currently having. With the ISCPO, we've taken a little bit different path. What we've tried to do is identify solution providers that are really best in class at what they do as it relates to transportation, logistics, security. And we vet them either by myself, our vice chairman, or somebody on our board of directors. And in order to be a part of our organization, somebody on the executive team has to have done business either currently or in the past with the solution provider, and they could speak to the quality in their product. And the premise behind that is anybody within our membership, if they were to reach out to somebody on our executive committee and want to be introduced to a vendor because they have a particular problem, instead of us going and hunting vendors, we've got the ability to point them in the direction and make a direct introduction to that solution provider, and possibly even participate in a call because we've experienced the same crime or the same security risk that that particular individual just recently did and is looking for an application. So it's really kind of a different way of doing things, but regardless, solution providers really need to be part of the solution versus just being considered as application vendors.
Well, guys, let's close with a little futurist discussion here. You know, let's put on our little fuzzy hats and get our crystal ball out. What's the landscape you think going to look like for cargo theft? What are we looking at in the next 5-10 years? You know, we've seen massive change in just the past few years, and this sort of evolution from that straight theft to the strategic theft. Where is that going? Where do you guys are living this? Where do you see this going, and what should people be getting ready for? Glenn, let's start with you.
I was hoping you were going to defer to Scott. Scott's got a lot better ideas.
Scott, let's start with you.
So I think it's interesting. I plan on talking about this at our conference in the next couple of weeks. So it's a great and timely question. It'll give me a little bit of a practice run with it. But I think when you look back over the last 10 to 12 years, the bad guys have always forecasted where they're going, right? So, you know, in 2013, we ourselves, you know, our investigative team here at Travelers, our SIG team, and people like Glenn and several other people in law enforcement worked a big pilferage case along the I-40 that was called the I-40 case. And that pilferage case was about really high-end electronics, right? Which has traditionally not been what we had seen for pilferage. It was mostly smaller stuff and the values were low, and so it wasn't talked about. And we kind of took that case study to the Texas Summit and said, hey, this is coming, and we think this is going to be a bigger problem. And sure enough, a couple of years later, it became a bigger problem, and still a big problem to this day. In 2016, we saw slight increases, upticks in identity theft, which, you know, started to really lead the strategic theft category. And then fictitious pickups came in, and then we saw ghost trucks. And we kind of went to that Texas Summit again, you know, all the experts, and said, hey, this is coming. And here's what we think you need to watch out for. And they, you know, so on and on, they kind of projected that. I think if we look at what they're telling us right now, they're telling us, expect us to start targeting freight anywhere at any time, right? So stop being so concentrated. You know, one of the question you asked earlier, Kevin, of, you know, the key areas, right? Those I think are always going to remain hotspots because that's where the cargo is all the time because of the ports. But hey, we're going to target freight where we want it, right? And we're going to move it more internationally. I think the other thing they're telling us is, you know, we're going to get a good idea of what your habits are. So what do I mean by that? Arizona has recently entered the top 10 for cargo theft. Why? In large part because of its proximity to California and the fact that bad guys figured out that drivers will try and get from California to Arizona before they stop for fuel because the fuel is $3 cheaper. So they picked up on a habit. So that whole west side of the state of Arizona is getting hammered by pilferage thefts. So I think they're telling us, hey, we're going to start paying attention to your habits, to your trends. What are you doing? We're going to find and exploit that. And then I think the next thing that they're telling us is this ability to manipulate the tools the supply chain creates. It is something they're going to continue to do, using the tools that the supply chain has created to be faster, more efficient, more effective, or where they're going to concentrate their efforts, meaning this, I can steal freight from anywhere, wherever it is, because I can just do it from a desk remotely. So they're telling us this is working. It's not going to stop until you stop us. And that goes back to what Glenn said earlier, which is you really got to get the solution providers in there, couple that with your own internal solutions and your process and procedures we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and I'll add to that because I'm not going to steal Jessica's thunder away, but to be bringing in industry experts who work for companies from a lobbyist standpoint, whether it be the American Trucking Industry Association, which we're ISCPO now is progressing collaborating on, or Jessica with UPS. I think you're now going to see a shift where we're bringing policy lobbyist type individuals in that really understand how to speak at the local, state, and federal level to our elected officials, and get them educated as well, right? I mean, we suffered back as e-commerce was developing, and it was like a rocket ship, right? Everybody ordering on the internet. A lot of companies were not verifying the IP addresses and whether they were coming from domestically or internationally. Bill to and ship to was different. All they really cared about was the sales, right? And the international groups realized this with sweethearting scams, internet scams, and it really wasn't until the collaboration started, we started educating both local, state, fed, especially at the federal level in DC, and even to the point where the Secret Service had a field office in a Western African country working specific to law enforcement. So we were getting to the root cause of where a lot of this crime was occurring. And to Scott's point, that's what's going to have to happen. It's going to take people from outside the industry, collaboration with elected officials, and then also collaboration internationally with elected officials and law enforcement as well. Because to Scott's point, this is not going away. And cargo thieves, like most thieves, we're going to keep doing it until you stop us.
I think that's going to be most thieves, right? Yeah, exactly.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. Very enlightening conversation here so far this afternoon. We've still got a little bit more to go, though. I wonder if you guys might, if you stick around for a couple minutes, maybe jump in the Q&A. There's a couple of questions in there you might be able to answer directly. I know one of them too was even asking about some of the organizations that folks might get involved with. Scott, that you had mentioned, you kind of rattled some off, but if maybe take a minute to drop a few in there while we look to introduce Jessica and continue this conversation now in a little bit different direction and get into some of the more legislative efforts that are going on out there. Let me just share my screen here. There we go. But thank you again, guys. Appreciate it. If you have any other questions for Glenn and Scott, feel free to stick them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get those knocked out as well. But next up, Jack, you want to introduce Jessica?
Absolutely here. The guys did a great job of handing that ball off, Tom Brady style, I think. Next up, we have Jennifer Lowrance, who is currently the Vice President of Public Affairs for United Parcel Service. She's been involved in a lot of efforts out there. Jessica, welcome. What can you tell us about yourself to start with here?
Hi, everyone. It's Jessica, not Jennifer, but that's okay. I get it a lot. I think it's a slip for Jennifer Lawrence. You know, I wish I was an actress in Hollywood and not on a webinar about strategic theft, right? But so Jessica Lowrance, I'm a vice president at UPS in their public affairs shop. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I help and I advocate on behalf of UPS on several issues, one of which is domestic supply chain, along with regulated goods. So any beer, wine, alcohol, firearm shippers out there, as well as working on the UPS store and the franchise business model. Pertaining to today, we're going to kind of go over a little bit about what is happening on Capitol Hill. The conversation has started at the state level, but has quickly escalated to the federal level only because of state lines. So we know that a lot of jurisdictions, if you want to go ahead and start the slides, Kevin, it'd be great. We know that a lot of jurisdiction stops when you cross that state line, and many of these crimes, and as we're seeing across the country, are crossing state lines. These organized theft groups are highly sophisticated. They're able to do many different types of theft, whether it's retail, rail, road. We're seeing them enter an area and kind of participate in multiple type crimes. HSI would tell you that they're so sophisticated that, you arrest 2 or 3 of them and 2 or 3 more folks pop up in their place, right? So it's a consistent organized crime effort, largely transnational organizations that are moving into the country in a vulnerable spot, as our previous panelist said, to really kind of take American goods, launder them, sell overseas, sell domestically. Sometimes we're finding that American businesses are buying back the goods at which they were stolen from, right? So we're trying to work in ways that on Capitol Hill to educate and kind of give a story to this. We know organized retail crime has largely been centerfold because it was so graphic, right? You could see the smash and grabs. You could see kind of those concerted efforts. Kind of a lot of times they think cargo theft is property crime. It's victimless, and put it in your insurance company. But we're seeing that on average, it is over $115,000 per cargo theft instance. And that's on the low range, right? And again, as Scott said, it's not as reported as we would like. Nobody wants to raise their hand and say, oh yeah, don't use our network, we get stolen from, right? So it's one of those where we are working to kind of gather and put our arms around the data from start to finish, railroad retail, and really look at what is being impacted, where it's happening. And another thing we're seeing is when you squeeze a balloon in, think about the LA ports, you squeeze that balloon and where does it pop back up? Well, now in the deserts of Arizona, right? So, it's not going away, as everyone has said. It's more about how we're going to manage it. And we believe that a more concerted federal effort needs to be paid attention to this, whether it's, when you talk to different companies, they work with various different agencies, but largely what we would like to see is one agency kind of be tasked with this initiative to combat supply chain fraud. More so than just retail, more so than just rail or road. We need it to be a concerted effort because we know that the hotspots, as you can see, are all over the country. And as you squeeze that balloon, they do pop up in other places. They pop up, where trains switch. They pop up in large warehousing districts. They're popping up, along a major highway and hitting the warehouses all along the, the 110 or along the 10 and south. So it's all these different kind of sophistication and ability to adjust very quickly, faster than we're able to, or law enforcement is able to. So next slide. We are seeing that telling the story is the most important part on Capitol Hill. It's connecting the dots and advocating for one kind of agency to take control. We see that as stolen goods continue to rise, it's starting to affect prices. It's starting to affect our food security. It's starting to affect all different aspects of not just, that one business who, is very well off, lost some goods. It is across many, many different sectors. It's affecting more than just a business. American households are starting to feel the effect of it. And we're starting to hear more and more of it. And it's not victimless, and it's increasingly becoming more dangerous. You can see here on the slide some of the top goods that are stolen. That food and beverage, energy drinks are huge, right? And I'm probably preaching to the choir on this, but they're quickly turned around and sold overseas because in many countries, energy drinks that are legal in the United States are not legal in other countries. We're seeing household good electronics. The copper is coming out of the walls of warehouses and the machinery in which we, move things. We're seeing it out of railroad lines or the switch tracks. They're pulling copper out, right? And it's not only damaging the goods or damaging the equipment in which we use, we then have to replace it, and it downtime, service levels, those sorts of things. So it's a ripple effect across the industry, and making sure lawmakers, especially federal lawmakers, understand that story. And the mere fact that it's across state lines is a huge part of what we're trying to do. So next slide. We started in, when I say we, it started small. It was UPS and Union Pacific. We kind of started working towards getting appropriations to have a line in the sand with an agency and with someone looking at it from not just a retail perspective. And so in the 2024 Homeland Security Appropriations, there was report language that directed HSI to create a report around the state of the industry and what was happening in regards to cargo theft. That has since been released. It is very thin, so don't get excited that you're going to have a robust report. It was a couple pages long, but it did highlight what was happening at a very high level and said what were some of the resources that a federal agency would need to, and HSI kind of raised their hand and said, we'll do this. Our purpose is to investigate and seize assets in transnational organizations. And we're seeing that the money made from these goods are not just staying in the States. They're being used for other high transnational crime, human trafficking, movement of, illegal drugs, fentanyl, those sorts of things. So it's not like someone's coming in and only, stealing from, a UPS truck. They're coming in, they're hitting an area, and they're bringing other illegal matters with them. So to build on our 2024 appropriations, we've been working with several groups, which our partner organizations, I'll talk about in a second. But in 2025 appropriations in the House language, we were able to put forth $2 million funding for the establishment of a fraud and theft task force within HSI. And this fraud and theft task force would largely look to investigate and begin to connect these larger dots of these transnational organizations, and hopefully partner with the Department of Justice, local, federal prosecutors, state prosecutors, attorney generals, to look at bringing forth these individuals, not just seizing their assets. Because what we've seen is, in some cases, the same people are being arrested 3-4 times a day, right? It's a very much catch and release system. So we need something larger than, and not that local law enforcement isn't combating the cases, but something larger to look at what everyone's doing in an area or in the next town over, or even the next state over. We also saw a lot of money be put towards the tracking, the data of this, the systematic entry of this data is going to be a heavy lift, and something that, as I learn more about it, whether you're looking at the innovation lab at HSI or other agencies and their technology and software cloud-based services, there is quite a price tag to being able to house this information. So we're looking at that in 2025, as well as designating special prosecutors with the Department of Justice to only handle cargo theft. $2 million, that's 2 to 3, 4 folks. They most likely be regional, not out of headquarters in the hotspots. So, think California, think maybe Arizona, Chicago, Memphis, Dallas. We're even starting to see activity in Florida, right? So Atlanta is a big one. So having these regional kind of prosecutors to take these cases, connect these dots with the investigation, with the agents in charge, and kind of bring forth those charges against them, and working hand in hand with that. Next slide. So that's appropriations, which is a different process than legislation. So one of the largest pieces of legislation that most of the industry supports is Safeguarding Our Supply Chain Act. It was introduced by Representative Valadeo out of California. And it does establish kind of a collect-all for the data, right? So we've been working with HSI pretty closely to identify how they would want to receive data. So they have their National Lead Development Center, which has been taking a lot of this information in. If anyone's interested and you guys have been collecting your own internal data, HSI is looking for test partners to bring forth cases in which they can investigate, seize assets, and work with, and try to start connecting the dots in these transnational organizations. So the National Lead Development Center would kind of act as the center to collect the data, which they then can parse out to these regional task force as in appropriations. So this would legislate and permanently establish these task force regionally to then work the cases, to bring forth the evidence, and then partner with those prosecutors that we had hopefully will be called out in a 2025 DOJ appropriation. So the point is, again, to create kind of federal response to this kind of a local crime, but it's happening so frequently and such high sophistication that we need something more than just local law enforcement, taking out one ring, because that one ring probably has 8 different cities under their kind of shield that they're working under. The next slide talks about the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. This is CORCA. This is more has a retail aspect to it than cargo. So cargo is kind of somewhat encompassed in that, and I think you saw from the earlier slide that HSI has said that 58% of all retail crime is cargo theft, so it happens between the warehouse and the retail outlet. So there's definitely a cargo component to CORCA. And obviously we're very short on days on our legislative calendar. So looking at what is the best format to move forward as an industry to support in the new Congress. And kind of deciding, is it a center? Is it, beefed up National Development Center, or their innovation lab, additional resources for HSI. Some folks work very close with the FBI. Is there funding for both, and everybody's holding hands? We find that a little difficult sometimes when there's not one agency with the lead, but you can see that there's definitely consideration from a federal level on this. There was just 2 hearings this week. It was a House Appropriations hearing where they had the Inspector General from DOT, and it was a congressman from Arizona asking the OIG about the increase in cargo theft. He talked about Arizona. He talked about his brokers and his small trucking companies out of Arizona and how this is very impactful. What was DOT doing about this? There was another hearing. HSI executive director was there talking with judiciary, and now granted they were talking about a whole bunch of different things, but there was retail crime brought up. Cargo was not brought up, but that's part of the education that this larger group is trying to do to make sure lawmakers understand that it's not just one silo of the industry. It truly is American businesses across the supply chain, and everyone's seeing it, right? It's not like, oh, they just target UPS, or oh, they just target FedEx, right? It's anyone that's trucking, moving goods, and the more security you put out there and the more things you try, the more sophisticated they get. That folks are having drones, whether it's follow a truck or a car, or I'm sorry, a rail car or a truck, and then the thieves start tracking the drones. So 1, they'll go where the drones aren't, knowing there's no security there to watch them, or 2, oh, well, they must be a really high powered or very valuable goods in that, and taking out the drones to steal the goods, right? So it's affecting everything from our on-time service scores. Think about cross-border trade. If your train is slowed down and you're supposed to hit a certain window crossing the border and you don't get it, all the goods are delayed another day, right? And so all of this has impacts to the businesses moving the goods. It impacts our customers. It impacts our relationships with our customers, and then their customers, right? Because they're expecting goods to be moved or things on the shelves and those sorts of things. So it's definitely a topic. The next slide and my final slide kind of shows the partnership organizations. There's lots of companies working also on this, but I figured if you belong to any of these organizations, they are very involved in this and a part of that conversation, talking with legislators. Again, this is more of a lobby shop, if you think of it, the supply chain kind of coalition that we've established, but like everything else, it is we're all kind of doing this on behalf of our company, but for the industry, right? And so having that voice, we're doing regular Hill events. I know the Chamber of Commerce is looking to do a full day event where even having some folks from this call come and talk, just to start educating staffers and lawmakers on the impact of this. Because as everyone keeps saying, this is not going away, and there needs to be more done than happening right now. So I'll turn it back to you, Kevin.
No, thank you, Jessica. Jessica, tell us a little bit more about, you've got this sort of little coalition that started with a couple of you and you've grown it out a little bit more and a little bit more. I'm curious to maybe if you're able to mention some of the other companies that are involved to kind of help people understand the different aspects. We do a lot in just retail, right? But there's a lot as Glenn and as Scott have pointed out, that happens before it even gets to retail, right? You guys help sometimes before retail and after retail and bringing, the product straight to the consumer and so forth. So, but we really need to look at this more holistically. We need to consider rail. We need to consider shipping. We need to consider, planes, trains, and automobiles, right? What kind of groups are involved in this coalition that you guys have brought together, and what's really the appetite to expand that and to, for other companies that want to participate in these groups?
Yeah, so I would say it's really kind of a grassroots efforts in the sense of everyone started seeing the problem within, whether it's their associations, because most of these are associations, but then, the associations would say, oh, a member company wants me to be involved. So think, electronic companies, think about all the other carriers, right, in the marketplace, not just UPS. Think all the rails have expressed interest and wanting to make sure that they're in the loop, and it's not like we have regular cadence meetings. The hearings were happening this week, and some folks shared things with me that I then shared to the group, so that we're all always on the same page, knowing what's happening from a Hill perspective and what's being talked about. The minute it's raised as an issue, I swear we pounce on that poor member to make sure that they hear from everybody, right? I also think that once a kind of something concrete that trucking and rail and retail get behind, I could see it being like a blast, right? Say, hey, this is the bill. Here's the way to get involved. You can email your congressman. Here's how you find who your congressman is. Here's your senator list. We need this introduced, or we need this voted on, or this needs to move, or, even doing things where it's local, right? When everyone's going to be home, and starting that grassroots effort on, talking with your congressman, letting them know if it's affecting your business, especially if it's in their district, as well as kind of starting to look for folks, and it's all sizes. It's not any particular. I will say, working with like an electronic company like Garmin, or working with the milk producers, the import exporters for milk. I think every food company is being affected by this, that moves good on trains or trucks, because the minute the seal's broken by FDA standards, that's now spoiled and they can't move it. And they have to pay for the cost of bringing it back, right? So if I'm, and when I say someone in the industry, not always UPS, but if I'm moving a good and in the end the seal's broken, because they don't really want to steal the milk or the chicken or the eggs, right? But they think it's electronic, so they break in, and now I get all the way to port to export this. Its seal's broken. I got to bring it back, right? I got to bring it back to the company. So that's an additional cost to me that I'm charging them. And so, look at, think across the board. I mean, you could probably name a company and they've at least raised their hand and said they're seeing these things, right? Some are going it on their own. Others are, involved, but waiting to see what the final product is to put the support behind it, sort of thing. So I definitely think that as we continue to, build out, it's going to be a grassroots, there's no dues or anything that we collect. It's more like, hey, everyone kind of carries their own water, and they're all supporting it. Everyone in the industry is saying the same thing, that it's a major issue, and here are where I do business, and this is where it's affecting me, and oh, by the way, we all support this bill. After a while it becomes a no-brainer. So avenues like this really help to spread the word on what we're doing, so that when it is time to press go, we would hope that, every person on this call would be like, yes, it's a problem for me, and I want a federal solution, and I want to know who I can call when it happens to me, or that 10 times a week it happens to me, or whatever the cadence is, so that that resource is there and you can reach out and it's being investigated and managed in an appropriate way.
Yeah, and one of the groups that's not listed here is the ISCPO that and Glenn, I saw you your camera pop back on. So apologize, I didn't see that in advance to add you guys in there, but we did make sure that we mentioned and gave a link in the chat there, I think, as well. Byron was good to put that in there, but definitely seeing an uptick, I think, in these groups coming together. Obviously, you're doing some really great work in pushing the legislative efforts. I think the opportunity for this supply chain fraud and theft task force. And when you say you mentioned that in 2025 appropriations, have we put that forward, or we have that approved?
So it was passed out of the House and got sent to the Senate.
Okay.
Right now, the Senate has not really picked up the appropriations as they did in 2024. There's probably going to be either a continuing resolution or an omnibus, most likely in lame duck. Maybe, is it through to the new president's elected, or when I say takes office, or is it through the 6 months as Speaker Johnson has kind of put forth? That's, someone paid a lot more than me could probably tell you the answer to that. But, because Congress is Lord knows, but I would say that it is definitely one of the things being looked at. I also think the administration that ends up winning will probably take maybe a different stance, right, than the current administration. So, kind of reading those tea leaves and starting in the transition with the new administration either, to bring this to the forefront as an issue. So all of that is the appetite of the administration to kind of confront the crime happening in the supply chain. And then I would say we have to get the bill reintroduced, right? And depending upon what that makeup looks like, does our lead sponsor remain in office, or are they kind of not invited back to the party? We won't know until November. And then, are we then shopping around for new co-sponsors? So all of those things play a role in that, but that's kind of what this group kind of sits and kind of strategizes on to say, who's, oh, it's Illinois. Well, let's look at the Illinois. What committees are they on? Who would take an interest in this and that sort of thing. We always want it bipartisan. This is not a talking piece for one party or the other. We want real movement on it. So we are looking for bipartisan and eventually bicameral, right? House and Senate efforts on this. And probably a new Congress will be energized, and we're hoping to continue our efforts in 2025.
Well, it sounds like you're pushing on the right direction too, because after everything we just heard from Scott and Glenn, this has clearly evolved, from the cyber side, that whole focus on the cyber side, where we're manipulating, systems, we're online, we're remotely accessing, these orders and making these requests of these trucking companies and so forth. That's all being done electronically, and the crime's happening more online. It's not happening where you can grab the guy who's actually taking the merchandise and say, I caught you. It sounds like there's some really good alignment there, between your group, Jessica, and Glenn, what you guys are working on. Glenn, are you familiar with some of the legislative efforts and those and beyond that? Anything you want to comment on there for?
Yeah, so and actually, the ISCPO is probably not on her slide because we just met Jessica about 2 weeks ago, just to really begin the collaboration. But really, it does go back, I think, to all the different organizations. The one thing that's great about this industry is that even though sometimes we work in silos and we're all working to achieve the same goals, it's not that we don't want to work together. It's just that we don't know that other organizations are out there. And sometimes we take it upon ourselves to where we have to grab the baton and run with this. But as we collaborate more and as we expand our networks, like I said, we're working with the American Trucking Association. We just had some recent collaboration with them, with Jessica's organization. So I think where we're at is, from a crossroads standpoint, is that we all understand that the crime now has evolved. It's changing. It's rapidly changing. And in order to reduce our exposure to this across multiple verticals, because when you really think about the supply chain, regardless of whether it's retail, manufacturing, technology, pharmaceutical, whatever vertical you're working in, everybody utilizes the global supply chain in some form or fashion. And really, we have to, in retrospect, realize that we can't have this kick the can mentality down the road that, well, we've got insurance for that. Someone's going to pay a claim. We'll wipe our hands clean. Because the reality of it is, we all collectively are going to have to come together. And as Jessica has illustrated, this is going to have to get legislative involvement in order to help solve this problem. We can't do it on our own.
Well, we got to get it from making a claim to reporting a crime, right? And that, that's where the disconnect is, looking at it and saying, oh, like you said, well, we've got coverage for that. We've got insurance, we'll take care of it. But there's a crime happening here. And we need those legislative efforts to make sure that people can be held accountable, right? So applaud both of you and your groups, Scott as well. Scott, is so active out there in the industry, and I absolutely cannot thank you guys enough for your time today, for sharing with us today. Jack, anything to wrap up before we close it?
Just real quick here, Jessica, if someone wants to get more information or wants to learn more about the Supply Chain Coalition, where can they go and look?
Oh, you're on mute, Jess.
Thank you. They can email me. That's fine. I'm happy to connect and talk with folks that are interested for sure.
Jessica, if you want to put your email address in the Q&A, that would be awesome. Glenn, any closing thoughts?
No, I mean, I really appreciate you guys bringing this to the forefront. For so many years, this has seemed to be kind of a pass-off type issue, and I think now it's really come to the forefront, especially at the level of crime that we are seeing, the multifaceted layers, and the large amounts of loss that all of us are being impacted by. So no, I really appreciate you and Jack and the magazine putting this together and allowing us to present on it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Jessica. Not Jennifer, Jessica. And thank you also, Scott. We definitely appreciate your time today. I think the more we can put some light and some focus on this, the better. Keep the conversations going, increase the awareness, and get that legislative arm moving so that we can hold people accountable and hopefully start to make an impact on this really rampant theft that's going on out there. Want to thank our sponsors today as well. So thank you to Genetec and to LVT. Very much appreciate your support for today. And again, we can't do these sessions without them, so please show them some love and at least visit their websites, learn more about their products. They're both doing some pretty amazing work for our industry, and we appreciate that. LPF, if you are not already certified, then why the heck not? Get involved today, get your LPQ, get your LPC, learn more at losspreventionfoundation.org. And remember, if you are already certified, that you need to keep track of your CEUs and get those reported as well. There's that QR code for Loss Prevention Magazine. If you were not subscribed, please get subscribed. It is free to be sent to your home or your office. So why not? Would be my question. Why the heck not? And I'm going to keep that QR code up there while I just say thank you to all of you for joining us today. We appreciate it. I'm going to leave it to Jack for his parting thoughts here. Jack?
Great slides today too, Kevin. Well done. So,
thank you.
Thanks everyone for showing up today. Stay safe out there and have a great week.
Beautiful. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.